My name is Adrian Nantchev, and this channel is all about helping you become a remarkable entrepreneur. So today I'm with Starr O'Hara to talk about, well, Starr, please, tell us about yourself, tell us what you're doing, tell us what your vision is, what your story is, and what difference you want to make in the world.
Sure. Thanks, Adrian. I'm Starr O'Hara. I'm primarily a creative writer. I like to write science fiction, fantasy, humor, and a little bit of like self-help essay type of nonfiction stuff. I will go ahead and jump to that part of the question where you asked, how do I want to make a difference in the world? I think my main vision is with my science fiction and fantasy writing is to write freedom into the future. I want to write stories that inspire people to see how or demonstrate how freedom can make everybody's lives better and more peaceful and more prosperous. So that's one of my big things.
That sounds really cool. But when you say writing, in what way exactly? So sci-fi and fantasy. So that's purely fictional work, and you also mentioned a little bit of non-fiction, self-help. Can you elaborate on those two, please?
Yeah. So the science fiction and fantasy, I've mainly been writing short fiction, and also commissioned pieces for different clients. But I am working on a novel that will probably come out at some point. I don't have a time frame yet, but I'm working on it. And then the nonfiction I write is generally going to be stuff on productivity, self-improvement, and time management, and then stuff that is particular to writers, how to, for instance, writer's block isn't real is one I wrote.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Last week. Writer's block isn't real, but here's how to conquer it. So, just for an example.
Well, I have written a few books before, mostly non-fiction, and I'm also, as of 24 hours ago, roughly, just under, I started writing my second official non-fiction book. Over the past few months, I've written a series of other small non-fiction work, mostly to do with marketing and business, and one also on economics as well. Just essentially taking all the stuff that I know and just publishing it, like 101 entrepreneur questions and answers and 101 entrepreneur lessons and mistakes. But I'm curious though, when you say that, like productivity and time management, you're essentially talking about habits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I definitely agree that writer's block does not exist. I can't quite remember where I heard that, but it was essentially it was Seth Godin now, I believe it was, because he was saying that in 150 years ago or so, people didn't have it. People didn't have it. They just kept writing. They just found new inspiration or new ideas, and I've not really had that problem either when it comes to non-fiction work. I find that it just flows out and just flows out. It's like, okay, let's write this, let's write that, and then how to join it together, let's put it in the correct sequence, let's elaborate more and make it more, fill it in. Is that what you feel, and is that what the article is about?
Well, that's close. I think that writer's block comes as a result. It's not real. What it is your mind is telling you something's wrong. Now, there's multiple things that could be wrong, but there's only one way that's like an umbrella fix for any of those things, right? So what could be wrong is, maybe you need to get up and move around, or maybe you're distracted by something that's going on in your life, or maybe you don't believe in yourself, you're suffering from low self-confidence. Those are three examples of things that could be wrong that your subconscious mind is trying to alert you to by saying, oh, I don't have any ideas, I can't write, But the way to fix any of those is to just sit down and write anyway. So I say put your butt in the chair, put your fingers on the keys, and write anyway. It's this, kind of indulging your belief in writer's block exacerbates the situation. So what you need to do is just write anyway, and remember that writers create their own inspiration. It's not a lightning bolt from the sky that gives you your ideas or gives you the inspiration to finish a project. It's sitting down and letting the words and the ideas flow through you. So you have to actually be in the process of writing in order to do that. You can't sit and say, oh, I'm not going to start writing until I get the inspiration or, the perfect idea to help me finish this. You just sit down and do it.
Yeah, I agree. Whenever I'm writing, whenever I feel writer's block or something of the sort like that, I'll take a change of scenery. A walk, for example. I think that's a good idea. Or do some things around the house, for example. Essentially, just disengaging my brain from the article, from what I'm writing. Change of scenery, think about something else, and come back to it with a slightly more fresh mind and a much fresher approach.
Right.
But I'm also very curious. You said that your vision, going back to what you said earlier, was to write freedom into the future. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So, I think as a speculative fiction writer, you have there's so much opportunity to show what could be, what the future could hold. And in terms of like technology that could exist or different, alien cultures that we could encounter or, different ways that society might be structured. I think, science fiction especially touches on all of those things. But one thing that future science fiction has to touch upon in some way is how people are organized, how civilizations are organized to get things done and get economic exchange happening and things like that. I feel like there's a great kind of libertarian tradition in science fiction that existed for a long time and has kind of fallen by the wayside recently. But I would like to contribute to that libertarian tradition. I would like to show civilizations where economic freedom and individual freedom are demonstrated. Like this is how freedom can improve people's lives and prosperity and people's access to needs and things, and the expansion of technology and innovation and things like that. I don't know if I explained that very well.
Well, that's all right. About a year ago, I had the idea to write some like dystopian or utopian fiction with regards to the libertarian approach on, I don't know, something like a 1984, but done with a different slant, or maybe Ayn Rand, and even a different slant, or something like that. Had the idea of it. Had the idea of writing something creative. Not so much. So looking back in hindsight, the desire to create something creative, not so much in a political stance, but more just for the fun of it, just for the creative flair, and just put something out into the world because it looks fun, it looks quite enjoyable, rather easy. Oh, let's do it again and again and again. I'm curious though. You talk about like organizing civilization, and you want to do that in the written form. How would you go about doing that? Would that be like through allegory, or how exactly?
Well, you just set up your, you have to build your world, and, part of the world building process is, this is how they do things in this world, So if I were building if I were doing some world building with a free society, but I want to show the contrast between how a free society is organized versus a not free society, then I might have two different societies kind of coexisting or maybe sometimes clashing with each other. And I would have a society that was set up in a free manner, like in terms of individual freedom, people have the right to property ownership. They're not they're not having their property confiscated from them by some farcical authority. They have the right to move freely and start businesses or provide for themselves without obtaining permission from some central authority. Everything is basically decentralized as much as possible. And then there might be another society where that's not true. Or you could have a society where both directions are kind of coexisting, but not coexisting, but in conflict. So there might be groups that say, this is the way we should do it, and another group that says, this is the way we should do it, kind of like the world we live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just always showing that contrast.
Showing the contrast, okay. In the book that I'm about to write, or just started writing, it's all about marketing and how to create content that your audience can care about. And in that book, I have a little, like a benchmark, a KPI, which is what I call the so what test. Mm-hmm. Where I'm looking at ways that I can have my audience care about what I'm writing about, but also at the same time, what I'm writing about suits them perfectly. So when people see this, because we're in competition for awareness and attention with everything in the world, when they see this, it passes the so what test, meaning, oh, that looks interesting. A knowledge gap or piques their curiosity. My quarrel with, not quite quarrel, but my doubt or my little extra thing to consider is that when writing in a way to change the future or to influence the world as opposed to just writing for fun, is how would you get people to care, essentially? How would you get people to care about changing the status quo or thinking in a different way of organizing society or even in politics, or even how would you get people to care about libertarianism? Because most people are going to look at that, certainly that topic or phrase, and either not know what it is or they're not going to care. It fails to pass the so what test.
Okay, so the main thing when you're writing fiction is you have to entertain. So entertainment always has to be your primary goal when you're writing a story or a novel. I wouldn't even recommend to put the word libertarian or anything like that on the back cover or in any of the marketing material for the book. You can weave in themes. Every author, every fiction author weaves in themes that are important to that author. It's impossible not to. But primarily your goal is going to be to entertain. And if you've entertained the audience, if you've got them hooked with characters that they can relate to, with interesting story, a plot with a lot of tension and things going on in there that they don't care about the theme. They care about what's happening in the story. They care about the characters and what the characters are going to do and whether the characters are going to survive this ordeal, I very much, disagree with the Ayn Rand style of writing with these 23-page long diatribes in, of a monologue, like Danconia talking about how the government, ruins everybody's lives for like 19, 20 pages. This is not entertaining. It's not. I'm sorry. I mean, very few people are actually entertained by that. So while there was, like, for instance, in Atlas Shrugged, there were the bones of a good story there. It was very preachy. It was very, just incredibly preachy. I'll just put it that way. So you don't want to be preachy. If you want people outside of your political thought movement to consider your ideas, you want to be entertaining, not preachy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can understand. I heard recently that Terry Pratchett, he had some essence of libertarianism sprinkled throughout his works. I don't particularly see it. Perhaps it's in his more later works. I've started reading the books in order of publication, and I'm on book 5, which I have not got that one. But I've heard that he sprinkles in these ideas of libertarianism in there, and also at the same time, Tolkien. I remember hearing a documentary years ago saying that The Lord of the Rings was an analogy for the economic system at the time when it was written in the 1930s and 40s and early 50s. That there was this comparison drawn up that the orcs in Tolkien's universe were analogous, so to speak, of capitalists, where they got other people to work for them and they were selfish and greedy and evil and ugly. But Tolkien always said that his work was not allegorious, but it's interesting to note. You also spoke about Ayn Rand. I haven't actually read Ayn Rand. I've heard that it's quite an interesting book. I've heard some of the summaries of it and how the millionaires or billionaires go on strike and the Galt's Gulch and I don't know, some of the things happen. I've heard it's not particularly good, but at the same time some libertarians do love it, but I have not read it. Perhaps in the future.
I think if I might butt in for a minute, I think that the thing is that there are a lot of libertarians who love it. There's nobody who's not a libertarian who loves it. So if you're a libertarian and you're writing fiction, or if you're anything, I mean, honestly, if you have any strong, political ideology or whatever you want to call it, I don't care if you're a communist or whatever you are, if you're writing fiction, you need to, and you want to influence other people to believe or understand, or consider things from your point of view. Your main goal needs to be entertaining. Ayn Rand's main goal, I think, was explain the theories in the fiction, and then maybe second or third down the list was be entertaining. So her only fans are libertarians. She doesn't have anybody from outside of libertarianism who's like, oh yeah, Ayn Rand, those were good books. It just doesn't happen. Anybody outside of libertarianism says, I hate Ayn Rand, or whatever, or I couldn't get into it, So you got to be entertaining first.
Yeah, and speaking of entertaining, going back a little bit, you mentioned that you want the story to be interesting. You gave a few lists, and you want the story to be interesting, as well as entertaining. Mm-hmm. Lately, I've been listening to a few talks by George R.R. Martin, where he's on a stage in front of an audience and just talking about writing, and I'll just listen to him, and I'll just take down some notes, some key words every now and then, key phrases or key lessons, just sprinkled throughout it. And as a quick side note, you said that one thing you didn't like about Ayn Rand was that every now and then these characters had these massive 29-page monologues. And what George tries to do is he tries to make the dialogue very snappy, one or two lines, one or two sentences either way, much faster, much more free-flowing, and probably also much more natural as well. But my question to you is then, when it comes to story or the narrative or the characters or things like Freytag's Pyramid, What is it you look for exactly? What's your kind of like key principles and lessons that you embed into the story?
Into story or into dialogue specifically?
Just keep it broad. Just story, please.
Okay. There has to be tension. There has to be tension. So, I want to, open the book. I want to start reading. I want to immediately have a character that I can relate to, or even if I can't relate to them, if like they're living in a world that's like entirely far removed from mine. Maybe they're different age than me. That maybe they're even a different species. I don't know. But something about them has to be relatable. Otherwise, I'm not going to continue reading. Usually, it's something that's emotionally relatable. They're fighting evil is a common one, or they've lost someone they loved and they're trying to get them back or get revenge, is another common one. I've heard it said there's only so many stories. Every story is basically a variation on 2 or 3 forms, or maybe 5 different forms. But what keeps you reading the story is primarily good tension. So you want to turn the page to find out what happens next. That's because the author has imbued the book with tension. There's something threatening the main character, threatening the protagonist, and you have to find out how the protagonist gets through this trial, or this this part of the thing. And then in dialogue, you want one character wants something, another character wants something else, and even if they're having a sweet conversation, there's got to be some tension there, or you won't keep reading. Even if they're in love and they're kissing or whatever, the tension might be, if we don't get rid of evil stepmother, then our love will not. Then we won't be able to get married and run away and live happily ever after, or whatever. There has to be some tension, even in the happiest scenes. So I think tension's the main thing, really. And then good writing does a lot. Like, you don't want to always have to be going back and reading over something over and over again to figure out what the author means.
Yeah, tension. What I heard and what I believe in is that every character has to have a motivation. Whether it's even a glass of water or going somewhere, there has to be a motivation to strive to get something or to achieve something. And you said also, like, it has to grip the reader. I heard from some editors, like last night actually, oddly enough, that you have to capture the reader's attention in the first 8 lines of the book.
Yeah.
And
I would say the first line.
The first line?
The first line, yeah. And that's especially even more true if it's a short story. If it's a novel, I think readers will give you a little more slack. They'll give you like a page or 2 before they make up their mind. But on a short story, it's like, sentence 1, you have to draw the reader in.
I agree with that.
It's best if you can do it with long fiction too.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Get them in from the beginning. You also mentioned the cliffhangers. One thing that George tends to do in his books, and I've yet to start reading them, depending on schedule, is that he would have each character's chapter would end on a cliffhanger, or a resolution, or a twist, or new information, something like that, which throws a spanner in the works. but then to find out to find out what happened or what the conclusion because of that, you have to wait for another 1 or 2 chapters because you got another 2 of the characters intertwined with that.
Right.
That's one way of keeping their attention and I don't know, making it more thrilling, more entertaining.
Right.
What do you think to that? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that, and I think the way that George uses cliffhangers is very well done. Although sometimes he has so many. I love George. I love George's work, but sometimes he has so many point of view characters that you can, by the time you get back round to one, you forget what was happening in their last chapter. But the way that he does cliffhangers is really good. Because what he does is he shows you some new bit of information, like you said, some new major, revelation right at the end of the chapter, and then you have to wait to find out. You read all these other characters' chapters until you get back to that character and find out how the character deals with this new revelation, how the character proceeds now with this new piece of information. Some writers do cliffhangers a different way. For instance, they'll end the chapter where, a piece of information, a major piece of information is about to be revealed. And then they end the chapter, and then you have to turn the page to find out what the piece of information was, which I think is kind of a cheap way of doing it. I don't like that. But it's basically a way that a lot of thriller writers who are writing usually only one POV at a time, one POV per novel. It's a way that a lot of thriller writers get people to keep reading the book without putting it down. So everything needs to feel fast-paced in a thriller. We're running, there's high-speed chases, and like the government's out to get us or whatever, or some spies, and so in order to get the reader to keep reading without taking a break, so they'll be like, what's behind this door? Oh my God, there's a door, what's behind it, right? And then you have to turn, then the chapter ends and you have to turn to find out what's behind the door. Whereas the way George does it is he'll be like, and there was a door, and they opened it, and it was a monster, and then you know what was behind the door, so you're not like dying of anxiety, wondering what's behind the door, but you're very curious as to how the characters are going to deal with this new revelation. So it's a different kind of cliffhanger, and I think a better kind.
Interesting. So, speaking of different kind, what are you working on now? What are your projects that you're working on?
Okay, so right now I have 3 different projects going on writing-wise. I'm working on Steemit.com every day, well, almost every day. I skipped yesterday. I publish an article or a story on Steemit almost daily. And another project I'm working on is something called Totally Fabricated Bios. These are commissioned pieces that I write. Basically, someone will. It's a biography that you can use on your social media or on your website, your blog, or whatever. It's about 750 to 1,000 words, written in kind of a story fashion. It's a biography in which almost nothing is true. So the way that I do this is I'll interview the subject and find out some true things about them, and usually they'll give me a favorite author or a favorite style of story that they like for me to try to write the bio in that style. So I have done Terry Pratchett, I've done the American Tall Tale, I've done Douglas Adams, several different authors and styles. And basically, I'll interview them and find out a few true things, because even the best lies have to be, built around a seed of truth. And then I write a wildly entertaining biography for them that they can put on their social media or blog page or whatever. And so I do those as commission pieces. I'm working on a collection of those right now. And then the other thing I'm working on is a novel that I'm not ready to talk about yet.
Well, that's all right. But these totally fabricated bios, how did you get into that? That sounds very unique, very creative.
Okay, yeah. So 2 years ago, about a little over 2 years ago, I got accepted to a kind of prestigious writing residency in New Hampshire. It's called Odyssey Writing Workshop, and it's a 6-week workshop for writers of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And I got accepted, and I never expected that I would be, that I would get this acceptance letter. And then I had to figure out how to raise the money for room and board, basically, to go up there for 6 weeks. So I ran a crowdfunding campaign, and one of the perks that I ended up offering was these totally fabricated bios. And I sold a few of them, I think 4 or 5. So that helped me get to the writing workshop. But then afterwards, since then I've had a few people come back to me and ask me, to write one for them after the crowdfunding campaign was over. So I think basically because I published the ones that I had written on my blog or whatever, and people saw them and they were like, "Oh wow, that's really cool. I want one,"
Can those also be found on Steemit?
Yes, I have. I think 2. I have 3 of them up on Steemit right now.
Sounds interesting. And also just remind me, Douglas Adams. Is he the guy that wrote Hitchhiker's Guide?
Yeah.
I'm just looking through it, and I don't see it, but yeah, okay, that's all right. So a crowdfunding, that's quite that's very entrepreneurial. That's quite cool. What is the Odyssey Writers Workshop? I've never heard of that.
It's a 6-week intensive residential workshop for writers of science fiction, fantasy, and horror in New Hampshire, which is on the East Coast of the United States. It's on a college campus, St. Anselm's College, but it's in the summer, so it's outside of normal school time, Basically, it was amazing. A lot of people apply there, and I think only 15 people get accepted per year. So you're living in a dorm with, college style with 15 other people, writers, and what we were doing was going to lecture, like class, probably 3 hours a day in the morning, and then we would have a critique circle where we'd all critique each other's writing. That would be 2 hours in the afternoon after lunch, and then you would have to turn in a new short story or novel chapter every week, while also critiquing 3 to 4 stories a night for your fellow students. And when I say critique, I mean a full-on, like, you would read the story and write a 1-page critique, and usually we'd have to read it twice. We were supposed to read it twice, like read it first and circle, things that you thought could be looked at, and then read it again for deeper understanding, and then write a full-page critique. So we'd be doing 3 or 4 of those per night, and then also, so mainly the weekend was when you wrote your story that was due the next week. So there was literally almost no free time. But it was basically like getting, I feel like it was like getting an MFA in 6 weeks. It was that kind of just like immersing yourself completely into story craft, and also I made some really amazing friends and networked a great deal, and our a core group of like 6 or 7 of us still meet weekly online for a kind of a writing, I don't know, meeting, like commiseration or whatnot. We still critique each other's stories and stuff. So it was really awesome.
That sounds actually really, really amazing. Really pushing you to become a damn good, better writer. That sounds really cool.
Yes.
What does MFA stand for, please?
That would be Master in Fine Arts.
Right.
That's what, yeah. So a lot of, I don't know how it is in the rest of the world actually, but in the United States, it seems like a lot of people, there's, I would say probably half of people who are professional writers, professional fiction writers, or creative nonfiction, assuming they have a college degree, which most of them do, at some point they want to go back and get a master's degree in writing, a master's in fine arts with a focus in creative writing. I never went to college, so I don't have any desire to. But I've even had, some of my classmates who went to Odyssey with me, who did have MFAs, said, this is almost like getting an MFA in 6 weeks. It was almost better because it was so much more intense and consolidated, saturated is the word I'm looking for.
Would that be like the writer's equivalent of an MBA, something as equally as prestigious or hard to attain?
Yeah, and I don't think it's very. I don't think either an MBA. It is exactly like an MBA for writers, but I don't think either the MBA or the MFA are very hard to obtain. If they're or prestigious, they're like, you can get into there's tons of schools that offer these master's degree programs, and it seems almost like in the United States, it's like people get their college degrees and find that they're woefully unequipped to support themselves in the world, even with these pieces of paper. And so of course they think, well, what do I need to do? I need more education. I need more pieces of paper, right? So they go back to school for a master's degree. It might be an MBA or it might be a whatever, MFA or some other thing. And then they think, well, now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to go out and make a living and put my mark upon the world. But they're still not. They're just in debt, is all it is. They're in massive amounts of debt.
So MFA, I have to look into that. That sounds fascinating. Just the knowledge, not so much the certificate or the piece of paper, just the knowledge and the people. That's what's more important. And
right.
And Starr, before we wrap this up, what is next for you? What are you doing? What's next for you?
I'm in this weird transitional phase right now where I'm shutting down one business and trying to figure out how to launch a second one. So I guess I'm still in the planning phases right now, but in the next year or so, I do foresee myself putting out at least 1 and possibly 2 books. One of those will probably be a collection of short stories, and one will be either a novella or a novel. And so I'm going to be getting more into publishing, self-publishing, most likely.
Yeah, I'm in a very similar situation. I'm going from one business to another, and the business that I'm working on is just a personal brand, this podcast, this YouTube channel, and once it's up and running and leveraged out or or something like that. I certainly, after I finish this current book I'm just started, I want to write a whole lot of fictional work, probably mostly on fantasy, probably influenced by Terry Pratchett, the writing style or that kind of world building. Just writing a lot, just for the fun of it, just creative fun.
Well, good luck.
Thank you very much. Now, Starr, what is the best way for the audience to get in touch with you?
Well, you should go on Steemit. My Steemit handle is at Leslie Starr O'Hara, so it's at symbol LESLIESTARROHARA. So you can check out my work there. And if you want to get in touch with me, it's the same user handle on steemit.chat. I'm also on Instagram under Cyborg Valkyrie.
All right.
I try to stay away from Twitter. Sorry.
Oh, why is that? Why is that?
As Twitter's just a bad place for me. I'll get into arguments, and it's just a big waste of my time.
Ah, okay. Yeah, waste of time. That's a bad. Yeah, forget about that. I'll add those in the link in the description below. But aside from that, Starr, it was great to have you on the show.
Thanks. Yeah, it was great to be here.
That's all right. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't already, click on the subscribe button below and press the bell notification that's right next to it for the latest uploads. How cool is that?